The dust cloud from the explosion still hung thick in the air as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison crawled through the rubble of what used to be a marketplace in eastern Afghanistan. His ears were ringing, and warm blood trickled down the side of his face, but he kept moving. Behind him, the rest of SEAL Team 7 was regrouping after the IED blast that had turned their routine patrol into a nightmare. "Sound off!" Morrison barked into his radio, his voice hoarse from the smoke and debris he had inhaled. One by one, his team members responded, their voices crackling through the static. They had all survived the initial blast. But Morrison could hear the strain in their voices. This wasn't their first rodeo, but explosions this size always left everyone shaken. The mission had started like any other. Intelligence suggested that a high-value target was meeting contacts in the local market. Their job was simple reconnaissance, gather information, and report back. No one expected the entire marketplace to become a war zone in the span of 30 seconds. As Morrison rounded a corner formed by collapsed concrete blocks, he spotted her. A woman in traditional Afghan clothing was trapped under a heavy wooden beam, her breathing shallow and labored. What caught his attention immediately was not just her obvious distress, but the way she held herself even while injured. There was something about her posture, the controlled way she managed her pain, that didn't match the panic he typically saw in civilian casualties. "Doc," Morrison called out to Hospital Corpsman First Class Maria Santos, the team's medic. Santos was already moving toward them, her medical kit bouncing against her back as she navigated the debris field. She had been with Team 7 for 8 months now, and Morrison had learned to trust her instincts completely. If anyone could help this woman, it was Santos. The woman's eyes followed Morrison's movements with an alertness that seemed unusual for someone who had just survived a massive explosion. Most civilians in her situation would be in shock, crying, or calling out for help. This woman was silent, watching, evaluating. Morrison filed this observation away as Santos approached. "What do we have, sir?" Santos asked, already pulling supplies from her kit as she knelt beside the trapped woman. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for obvious injuries while speaking in broken Dari, trying to reassure the victim. Morrison positioned himself to help lift the beam while Santos worked. As they carefully moved the heavy wood away from the woman's legs, he noticed something else unusual. Despite being trapped and obviously in pain, the woman had maintained what looked like a defensive position with her arms, as if she had been trained to protect herself, even while unconscious. The rest of the team formed a protective perimeter around them. Sergeant Mike Chen scanned the area with his rifle, while Petty Officer Second Class Davis monitored their radio communications. The explosion had attracted attention from both friendly and unfriendly forces, and they needed to move quickly. Santos began her initial assessment, checking the woman's pulse and looking for signs of internal bleeding. The woman's eyes remained alert, following Santos's movements with an intensity that made the medic pause. Most patients in this condition would be drifting in and out of consciousness, but this woman seemed to be cataloging every detail of her treatment. "Her vitals are stable," Santos reported. "But I'm seeing some concerning signs here, sir." She gestured toward the woman's arms and hands. What Morrison had initially taken for defensive positioning, Santos recognized as something else entirely. The woman's muscle memory was showing through her injury, even in her weakened state. Her hands naturally fell into positions that suggested extensive combat training. The woman spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper but clear and controlled. She spoke in perfect English, with no trace of a local accent. "How many of your team are injured?" she asked, immediately shifting Santos's attention from her own wounds to the welfare of the soldiers around her. Morrison and Santos exchanged glances. This wasn't a question a typical civilian would ask. Most people in her situation would be focused entirely on their own survival, not inquiring about the tactical situation of their rescuers. Santos continued her examination, noting calluses on the woman's hands that were consistent with weapons training. Her physical conditioning was evident despite her traditional clothing, and there were faint tan lines that suggested she was accustomed to wearing different types of gear regularly. "We need to move her," Santos told Morrison quietly. "But sir, I think there's something you should know about our patient here." Before she could elaborate, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the destroyed marketplace. The rest of the team immediately shifted into high alert positions. Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Looks like a mix of Afghan army and some unmarked SUVs." Morrison processed this information quickly. The presence of unmarked vehicles could mean anything, from international aid organizations to private security contractors, or worse. The woman struggled to sit up despite Santos's protests. "You need to establish communication with the lead vehicle," she said with an authority that made Morrison's instincts flare. "Tell them that Mockingbird is secure but injured." Morrison felt his blood run cold. Mockingbird wasn't just any call sign. It was classified, known only to a very select group of people involved in the most sensitive operations in the region. This woman wasn't a civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was someone far more important and far more dangerous than she appeared. Santos continued working on the woman's injuries. But Morrison could see the medic's hands trembling slightly as the implications became clear. They had stumbled into something much bigger than a routine patrol gone wrong. The woman they were treating wasn't just injured. She was a key player in operations that existed far above their security clearance level. The approaching vehicles grew louder, and Morrison had to make a decision. Trust that this woman was who she seemed to be, or treat her as a potential threat until proven otherwise. Either choice could have consequences that extended far beyond this moment. "Santos," Morrison said quietly, "I need you to keep working, but be ready for anything. And whatever happens next, document everything you observe about our patient. Something tells me this is going to be important later." The woman looked directly at Morrison with eyes that held knowledge and experience that didn't match her civilian appearance. "Commander," she said, using his rank despite never being told what it was, "your team's safety depends on getting me back to my handlers alive. The explosion wasn't random, and we're not safe here." As the first of the unmarked vehicles rounded the corner into the destroyed marketplace, Morrison realized that his team had just become part of an operation they never knew existed, centered around a woman whose true identity was still a complete mystery. The unmarked SUVs came to an abrupt halt in a formation that immediately told Morrison these weren't random aid workers or contractors. The vehicles positioned themselves with precision that spoke of military training and tactical awareness. 3 men emerged from the lead vehicle, all wearing civilian clothes but moving with the purposeful stride of special operations personnel. Santos continued working on the woman's injuries, but Morrison could see her stealing glances at the approaching figures. The team medic had noticed the same things he had about their patient, and now they were both wondering exactly what they had gotten themselves into. The lead figure approaching them was a tall man with graying temples and the kind of weathered face that came from years of operations in harsh environments. He wore no visible rank or identification, but everything about his bearing suggested senior leadership. Behind him, 2 younger men flanked his position with the unconscious coordination of a well-practiced team. "Commander Morrison," the man called out as he approached. Somehow, knowing Morrison's name and rank without any introductions. "I'm Agent Richardson with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I believe you've encountered one of our assets." Morrison kept his weapon ready but not threatening as Richardson approached. The fact that this man knew his name and was identifying himself as DIA immediately elevated the situation beyond anything Team 7 was typically involved with. DIA operations meant intelligence gathering at the highest levels, often involving assets whose identities were compartmentalized far above Morrison's clearance level. The woman, who had been silent during Santos's continued treatment, spoke up again. "Richardson, tell them about the secondary target." The explosion was meant to flush out whoever responded to the initial blast. Her voice carried an authority that made Richardson pause and reassess the tactical situation. Morrison felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. This wasn't just a random IED attack on a marketplace. It had been specifically designed to target whoever came to investigate or provide aid. His team had walked directly into a trap that was meant to eliminate both the woman and anyone who tried to help her. Santos looked up from her patient, her face pale as she processed the implications. "Sir, if this was a planned attack targeting rescue operations, we need to assume there are additional threats in the area. My patient here has extensive combat training based on her physical conditioning and reflexes. This isn't someone who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Richardson nodded grimly. "Your medic is correct, Commander. Agent Harper here," he gestured toward the woman, "has been operating undercover in this region for the past 14 months. The intelligence she's gathered has been instrumental in several recent operations, including some that have directly benefited your unit's missions." Agent Harper, as Morrison now knew her, struggled to sit up further despite Santos's continued protests about her injuries. "The meeting I was attending when the explosion happened was compromised. Someone leaked the location and timing to hostile forces. There's a mole in the intelligence network, and until we identify them, everyone involved in this operation is at risk." Morrison processed this information while maintaining awareness of his team's positions. Chen and Davis were still maintaining perimeter security, but he could see the tension in their postures as they realized they were now part of an intelligence operation, with implications they couldn't fully understand. Santos had finished her initial treatment and was preparing Harper for transport. "She needs proper medical attention. Active," Santos told Richardson. "I've stabilized her current injuries, but there could be internal damage that I can't assess properly in the field. She needs to get to a hospital, or at least a proper medical facility." Richardson shook his head. "That's not possible. Agent Harper's cover identity is blown, which means standard medical facilities are compromised. Anyone looking for her will expect us to take her to the nearest hospital or military medical unit. We need to extract her through alternative channels." Harper managed a weak smile despite her obvious pain. "Commander Morrison, your medic has training that goes beyond standard military medicine. I've read her file. Hospital Corpsman Santos has advanced trauma training that qualifies her to handle my care during transport to a secure facility." Morrison looked at Santos with new understanding. He had known she was an exceptional medic, but Harper's words suggested there were aspects of Santos's background that even he wasn't fully aware of. Military medical personnel with advanced trauma training often had experience with special operations that wasn't reflected in their standard service records. Santos met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I can maintain her care during transport, but I need to know exactly where we're going and what kind of facilities will be available when we get there. Some of her injuries require attention that I can only provide temporarily." Richardson gestured toward one of his team members, who approached with what looked like a standard military radio but was clearly something more sophisticated. "We're taking her to a facility that officially doesn't exist. It's equipped to handle medical emergencies for personnel involved in classified operations. Your team will need to sign additional security agreements, but you're already involved now whether we planned it or not." Morrison realized that his routine patrol had just become something that would likely affect his team's future assignments permanently. Once involved in operations at this level of classification, there was rarely a way to simply return to standard duties. His team had just crossed a line into the world of intelligence operations that existed in the shadows of conventional military activities. Harper winced as Santos helped her into a sitting position. "Commander, there's something else you need to know. The intelligence I gathered before the explosion involves planned attacks on several forward operating bases in this region. Your unit's base is one of the primary targets. The timing of today's attack suggests those operations may be accelerated." The weight of this information hit Morrison immediately. Not only had his team stumbled into a compromised intelligence operation, but the mission Harper had been working on directly affected the safety of everyone at their base. The explosion that had seemed like a random act of terrorism was actually part of a larger, coordinated effort. Richardson's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. After a brief conversation in code phrases that Morrison didn't recognize, Richardson's expression became more urgent. "We need to move now. Intelligence suggests there are additional hostile forces converging on this location. Commander, I'm officially requesting your team's assistance in securing Agent Harper's extraction. Morrison looked at his team, then back at Harper and Santos. His medic was already repacking her equipment with the efficiency of someone preparing for a dangerous transport operation. Harper, despite her injuries, was alert and ready to move. The situation had evolved far beyond anything in their standard operating procedures. But Morrison recognized that they had no choice but to see it through. Santos, how mobile is she? Morrison asked, preparing to give orders that would commit his team to an operation they hadn't trained for. Santos finished securing Harper's bandages and looked up with the professional confidence that had made her such a valuable team member. She can move with assistance, but we need to be prepared for the possibility that her condition could deteriorate rapidly. I'll need to monitor her continuously during transport. Harper looked directly at Morrison with eyes that held both gratitude and determination. Commander, your team's assistance could mean the difference between preventing those attacks on your base and losing dozens of your fellow service members. This operation is bigger than any of us individually. As Richardson's team prepared to move out, Morrison made the decision that would change his team's involvement in the war they thought they understood. They were no longer just Navy SEALs on a routine patrol. They had become part of an intelligence operation with stakes that extended far beyond their original mission parameters. The convoy moved through the Afghan countryside with a precision that spoke of years of experience operating in hostile territory. Morrison's team had been integrated into Richardson's operation with remarkable efficiency, but the tension in the vehicles was unmistakable. Everyone understood that they were now part of something much larger and more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. Santos rode in the same vehicle as Harper, continuously monitoring her patient's condition, while the armored SUV navigated the rough terrain. Harper's injuries were stable, but Santos could see signs that suggested her patient was fighting off more than just physical trauma. There was a mental strain evident in Harper's eyes that spoke of someone who had been operating under deep cover for an extended period. How long have you been working this region? Santos asked quietly, adjusting Harper's Ford drip while keeping her voice low enough that the others in the vehicle couldn't hear. Harper managed a weak smile. 14 months this time, but I've been in and out of Afghanistan and Pakistan for the past 6 years. Long enough to know that today's attack was planned by someone with access to classified operational details. Someone who knew exactly when and where I would be. Santos processed this information while checking Harper's pulse again. The implications were staggering. If there was truly a mole within the intelligence community, with access to Agent Harper's operational details, then the entire network of covert operations in the region could be compromised. In the lead vehicle, Morrison was receiving a briefing from Richardson that filled in more details about the operation they had inadvertently become part of. The intelligence Harper had been gathering involved not just planned attacks on forward operating bases, but a coordinated effort to eliminate key intelligence assets throughout the region. Agent Harper's cover identity was built over several years, Richardson explained as their vehicle wound through a mountain pass. She had successfully infiltrated a network that was planning simultaneous attacks on 3 different bases, including yours. The information she gathered could prevent hundreds of casualties. Morrison understood the weight of responsibility that had suddenly fallen on his team. They were no longer just protecting one injured intelligence officer. They were safeguarding information that could save the lives of fellow service members across the entire region. Chen's voice crackled over the radio from the rear security vehicle. Multiple vehicles approaching from behind. Looks like they've been following us for the past 10 minutes. The convoy immediately shifted into high alert mode, with Richardson coordinating evasive maneuvers while maintaining communication with an operations center that Morrison was beginning to realize existed at a level of classification he had never encountered before. In Santos's vehicle, Harper struggled to sit up despite her injuries. They found us faster than expected, she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to operating under extreme pressure. Corpsman Santos, I need you to understand something important. If this convoy is stopped, the information I'm carrying cannot fall into hostile hands under any circumstances. Santos felt her blood run cold as she realized what Harper was implying. The intelligence she had gathered was valuable enough that there were protocols in place to prevent its capture, even if that meant ensuring it was destroyed, along with everyone who had access to it. The pursuing vehicles were gaining ground despite the convoy's evasive maneuvers. Morrison could see through his rear window that there were at least 4 vehicles following them, moving with the coordination of a well-organized pursuit team. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a planned interdiction operation. Richardson's radio communications became more urgent as he coordinated with air support that Morrison hadn't known was available. Within minutes, the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters could be heard over the engine noise of their vehicles. Harper grabbed Santos's arm with surprising strength for someone in her condition. "I need you to know something about your own background," she said quietly. "Your advanced trauma training wasn't just for standard military operations. You've been cleared for medical support of classified operations because someone recognized your potential value for situations exactly like this one." Santos stared at Harper in shock. She had always wondered why her medical training had included certain specialized procedures that seemed beyond what a standard military medic would need to know. Now she was beginning to understand that her career path had been influenced by considerations she had never been made aware of. The sound of gunfire erupted from behind them as the pursuing vehicles engaged with the helicopters that had arrived to provide air support. Morrison could see muzzle flashes in his side mirrors and realized that this had escalated into a full-scale combat operation. "All vehicles, prepare for emergency extraction procedures." Richardson's voice came over the radio. Quote, Morrison had no idea what emergency extraction procedures involved, but the tone suggested they were about to experience something well outside standard operating procedures. The convoy suddenly veered off the main road toward what appeared to be an empty field. As they approached, Morrison could see that what had looked like vacant land was actually a camouflaged landing zone, where a helicopter was already waiting with its rotors spinning. Santos worked frantically to prepare Harper for what was clearly going to be a rushed transfer under fire. "I can keep her stable during the helicopter flight," she told Richardson, as the vehicles came to a stop near the landing zone, "but she needs proper medical facilities as soon as possible." Harper looked directly at Morrison as the team prepared to transfer from the vehicles to the waiting helicopter. "Commander, what your team did today will be classified at levels that mean you'll never be able to discuss it with anyone. But the lives you've helped save will include people you serve alongside every day." The transfer to the helicopter happened under covering fire from both the air support and Richardson's team. Morrison's SEAL team moved with the precision they had been trained for, but this was unlike any extraction they had ever practiced. The combination of medical emergency, intelligence, protection, and active combat created a complexity that tested everyone involved. As the helicopter lifted off with Harper, Santos, and Richardson aboard, Morrison could see the pursuing vehicles being engaged by the remaining air support. The entire operation had lasted less than 4 hours, but he knew it had fundamentally changed his team's understanding of the war they were fighting. Back at the forward operating base later that evening, Morrison sat with his team as they completed the most classified debriefing of their military careers. They had learned that the woman they had found injured in the marketplace was responsible for intelligence that had already led to the prevention of 3 separate attacks on American forces. Santos had remained with Harper at the undisclosed medical facility, her specialized training making her an essential part of the continued operation. Morrison realized that his team medic had always been destined for assignments that went far beyond standard military medicine. 3 weeks later, Morrison received word through classified channels that the intelligence network Harper had infiltrated had been successfully dismantled. The mole who had compromised her operation had been identified and arrested, and the planned attacks on forward operating bases had been prevented. Agent Harper had recovered from her injuries and had already been assigned to a new operation in a different region. Her true identity remained classified, but Morrison knew that somewhere in the world, she was continuing the dangerous work of operating undercover to protect American forces and interests. The official report of Team 7's patrol that day made no mention of Agent Harper, Richardson, or the intelligence operation they had become part of. As far as the military record was concerned, they had responded to an IED attack, provided medical assistance to a civilian casualty, and returned to base without incident. But Morrison knew that his team had crossed a line into a world of operations that existed in the shadows of conventional military activities. They had become part of the intelligence community's efforts to protect American forces through operations that would never be publicly acknowledged. Santos eventually returned to Team 7, but Morrison could see that her experience supporting Harper's operation had changed her understanding of her role as a military medic. She now knew that her training and clearances opened doors to assignments that went far beyond anything in standard military medicine. The woman they had found injured and silent in the rubble of an Afghan marketplace had been far more than a civilian. She had been a guardian angel whose work in the shadows had saved lives they would never know about. Operating in a war that was far more complex and far-reaching than any of them had previously understood.